Welcome back to Kindling, where African stories come to life. I'm Awe, your storyteller. Now today, we journey to Libya, a country stretching from golden desert sands to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Libya is known not only for its rich history and ancient cities like Leptis Magna, but also for one very well-known, much beloved folk character, a young man named Djeha. Now, very much like the Anansi spider character in West African folklore, or Nasreddin Hodja in North Africa and the Middle East, Djeha from Libya is a trickster, clever, witty, and always one step ahead. Now, our tale today is a tale of cunning, of revenge, and of course, a little bit of luck. It's called Djeha and the Sea of Miracles. Let's hear it. Once, long, long ago, in a quiet Libyan village tucked between the mountains and the sea, a young man named Djeha was put in charge of managing his family's herd of cattle. Now, amongst the cattle was one small calf. It was the only one that Djeha himself owned. It was his very own. And of course, it was the best fed. It was healthy and fatter than all the rest of the herd. Now, growing jealous, one day, Djeha's relatives sent him away on an errand into town. And whilst he was away, they hatched and cooked up a plan. When he returned, they told him, "Oh, Djeha, we're very sorry, but we simply couldn't resist," they said. "Your calf looked so delicious, and so we slaughtered it and we feasted on it." And with that, they licked their lips and their fingers just to demonstrate to him how delicious that meat had been. Now, Djeha, hearing that his relatives had slaughtered his calf and only his calf, did not get angry. He simply stayed calm and thought to himself. And then, at last, he said, "That is fine, but at least give me the hide of the calf so that I can tan it and sell it at the market and at least make something from my animal." And so the relatives agreed, thinking that he would not be able to make very much money with a small calf hide. Well, Djeha took his calf skin. He tanned it, he put salt into the skin, did everything he needed to do to tan it, and then set off to the market and spent an entire day around the market trying to sell this calf. But by the end of the day, he had nothing but a single penny that he had earned for all his effort. Disappointed, but at least glad to have something, he bored a hole through the penny and threaded a red string through it and tied it around his neck and set off on his way home. Now, on the way, he came across two men secretively crouching over a small box, a treasure chest that was brimming with gold. "Salam," said Djeha politely to the men. "What do you want?" they barked at him. "Nothing, only that you are dividing treasure there that isn't yours," he said, slyly dropping his red string penny into the treasure chest without their notice. "Nonsense. This treasure is ours. We found it, and it belongs to us." And they stood before him, ready to fight. Djeha, of course, stayed calm as usual. "I say that this treasure is mine," he said, "and I can prove it. You see, I keep amongst my own gold a single penny threaded with a gold string, and this is a token, a reminder from me of Allah's blessings. And I keep this with my gold. Sure enough, if you look in this chest and you find that penny, you will know that is proof that this gold indeed belongs to me." Well, seeking only to appease the stranger so that they could send him on their way, the two men began to look in the chest, and sure enough, there it was, in amongst all the gold, the single gold penny with a red string, threaded through it. By Allah, they said, you are right. And so they had no choice but to give him some of the treasure. At first, of course, they offered him 1/3, but Djeha retorted, 1/2 of the treasure, or none. And the men, of course, agreed because they did not want to anger Allah by stealing from the man to whom the treasure belonged. Well, with that, having divided and gained half of the treasure, Djeha now set off with all this treasure packed into his cloak. It was laden down. And as he returned to his village and to his home, his relatives saw him and started to gasp. Look at him, he's laden with gold. Where did you get all of this gold? From the hide of my calf, said Djeha, laughing proudly. Well, greedy and foolish, the relatives began to see an opportunity and they became jealous. They decided that they too would slaughter their cows and go to the market and get the same money. But now, of course, they were hanging on Djeha's every word. And he said to them, don't rub salt into the hides. I will tell you when the hides are ready. It must be this way, otherwise you will not fetch very much. And so the relatives listened to his instructions. They left the cowhides to rot in the sun until maggots had begun to hatch in the skins. And then, at last, Djeha said, now you may take them to the market. And so the relatives did as they were told. But of course, when they had taken their stinking pile of rotting cowhides to the leather market, the leather merchants simply laughed at them and chased them away. Well, returning disappointed at last back home, they confronted Djeha. You tricked us, they shouted at him angrily. You told us that we would get money for these skins, but look at them, they are rotten and stinking. We have been chased away and humiliated, chased with sticks through the towns. And with that, they lost it. They were so angry and livid, especially when Djeha turned and said to them, did you truly believe that gold could come from rotten cowhides? Well, seeing his mocking laughter, the relatives became even more livid. They were infuriated, and so they decided to take their anger out on this clever young man. They grabbed him and they stuffed him into a sack and dragged him on the way to the sea. But because, of course, they had already been to the market and back and spent the whole day carrying around these heavy hides of cowhide, they were now exhausted. And so, before they proceeded to drag Djeha to the sea to throw him into the water, they decided to take a rest. They stopped under a tree with the bag and the sack Djeha tied up inside, and they paused to drink some milk when they saw a nearby shepherd walking with his sheep. Now, after drinking the milk that the shepherd had shared with them, of course, the relatives became a little bit dozy and a little bit sleepy, and they decided to have a rest, and they fell asleep under the trees. The shepherd, of course, was now curious about what was in this mysterious sack that they were carrying, and so he began to poke at the bag with a stick. Leave me be, growled Djeha from inside. Oh, startled, the shepherd gasped, who is inside? I am a man on my way to read the book of fate, Djeha said, very dramatically. Interesting, thought the shepherd to himself, and then Djeha continued, they are taking me to discover my future. Now, leave me be, don't disturb me. Oh, thought the shepherd, I wish I could see what is in my future. My present life is so difficult. I wish I knew what comes next for me. Please, let me take your place on this sacred journey. I beg you. Well, after much pleading and persuasion, back and forth, Djeha finally relented. He thought to himself, hesitating. And then he finally said from inside the sack, "Very well. They may think me foolish, but you have convinced me. Very well. All right. Take my place, but do not waste this blessing, brother. Promise me. Now, untie me from the bundle, and then climb in here in my stead, but do not utter a word that you have taken my place." And of course, with that, the shepherd dutifully untied the sack eagerly, and Djeha climbed out and helped the man back into the sack and tied it as tightly as he could. Now, after saying their goodbyes and wishing luck to the shepherd who was now inside the sack, Djeha set off home, driving the shepherd's flock of sheep back to his village. Of course, when Djeha's relatives awoke, they were none the wiser, and so they took the sack, which they felt still contained a human being, the silent shepherd inside, and tossed it into the sea. That evening, they danced and sang, celebrating that they had drowned that pesky trickster Djeha. But of course, as they were dancing around the fire, they saw the very same Djeha coming back home with a huge flock of healthy sheep. "Where did you get all these sheep from?" they exclaimed and asked, curious and, of course, greedy. "From beneath the sea," he said. "There's a whole world down there, cattle and sheep grazing under the waves. I found them there when you threw me into the water, and now I have returned with a bountiful flock." Well, once more, the relatives simply could not resist. They saw an opportunity, and under Djeha's command, they decided to follow this quick path to wealth. "You must tie up your children," he said. "Send your children down there, and the children will be able to bring back many, many livestock for you. Sheep, goats, anything you could dream of. Send your children to bring them back." And so, of course, the very next day, the relatives did as they were told. They tied up all their children in sacks, as they had done with Djeha, and dragged them to the sea and threw them into the water. Then they returned home and waited. Evening came, no children, and so they waited. Morning came, still no children, and they waited. But by the evening, when the children still had not returned, they began to realize that once more they had been tricked. And now at last the relatives saw this as the final straw. They lost their temper. They began to howl and cry and scream at Djeha. "You tricked us. We have lost all our children because of you, because of your lies." Right then they resolved that they had to be rid of this young man once and for all. And with that, the relatives now set about grabbing Djeha, subduing him, and they decided this time that they would drag him out to the very middle of the desert where nothing else grew, where there was nothing but the scorching heat of the sun and the desert sands. And they would tie him up to a tree and leave him there alone to die a slow and painful death. Well, Djeha laughed. "Did you really believe that sheep would graze beneath the sea?" This only infuriated them more, and so the relatives took him, dragged him out, and left him in the desert as they had threatened, left him to die. But fate was not quite done with our trickster yet. For while he was waiting there in the middle of the desert, along came a qaid, a high-ranking judge, dressed in fine robes and riding a camel, on his way back from the Tunis. Now the Caid saw this tree and saw this man tied up in the middle of nowhere, and he stopped, curious, and asked him, "Young man, what are you doing here in the middle of nowhere by yourself?" "Shh," said Sujana. "Do not disturb me. Do not disturb me." The Caid was intrigued. "Disturb you? What are you doing?" "Shh, be silent," said Sujana. "Do not disturb the miracle. I have been standing here for a long time. You see, yesterday morning I was 100 years old. But they tied me up to this very tree. And over the night, whilst I was tied to this holy tree, I have been restored and I have been given back my youth. Now, be quiet and leave me be in peace." Now the Caid was now very, very intrigued. He wanted to know more. "Is it really so that you have become younger?" "Shh, you can see for yourself," said Sujana. "I have been tied to this holy tree of Sidi Abdi Kabel, and you can see I have grown young already. Can't you see? I am young and I am fit. Now, leave me be, you are disturbing me." Well, of course, the Caid, who was himself an elderly man, became even more curious, as Sujana explained to him, "It will be so with any aged man who wishes to regain his youth. He has simply to be tied here next to this tree and to stand here overnight in absolute concentrated silence, and youth will be restored to him." Well, now the Caid was fully invested in Sujana's stories. "Yes, I would like to regain my youth," he thought. "Let me try it," he said. Now Sujana, of course, refused. "Leave me be. Stop bothering me." But, of course, after much back and forth, pleading and persuasion, Sujana finally appeared to hesitate and said, "Very well. And you know what? I do not really wish to grow much younger than I am now. And so, you may loosen my bonds, and you may take my place." Now, very eager and excited to see his own transformation, the Caid indeed loosened Sujana's bonds and prepared for his own turn. But Sujana suddenly stopped him, saying, "First, look at what you are wearing. No, this will not do. You see, a simple shirt like mine is the best thing to keep between yourself and the tree in order for its powers to fully work. You will have to remove your fancy clothes and your thick finery in order to be as close as possible to the magic of the tree." And so, fully believing Sujana's stories, the Caid now removed his traveling cloak and his robe and laid aside his sash and his turban, all made of fine silks, and put them aside, and then allowed Sujana to fasten him to the tree, tying knots around him as tightly as he possibly could. Now, Sujana himself donned the finery of the Caid, and with that parted with one more word. Now remember, in order for the power of this holy tree to work, you must remain absolutely silent. Say nothing, do not utter a single word, and you will be transformed. And with that, Sujana, now dressed in the man's finery, climbed upon his camel and set off in the distance, humming. And that is where the story ended. Well, Sujana may not have had power or wealth, but he had wit and wisdom disguised as foolishness. His tricks may have been sharp, even cruel at times, but they do reveal a number of important truths that this tale of course, teaches us. First, that greed often leads to our demise. The relatives couldn't help themselves. They were always looking for a quick opportunity to become rich and wealthy with the smallest amount of work possible. And of course, that led them down the wrong path. The tale also reminds us that those who blindly follow others without thinking for themselves will often stumble and get into more trouble. And finally, that sometimes a sharp mind is the greatest treasure of all. So, the next time someone takes advantage of you or underestimates you, don't get angry. Stop for a moment, smile, and like Djeha, think your way out of a problem. You might just surprise yourself and them. That's it for today. We'll be back next week with another tale, and we're heading out to the sea, to the island of Madagascar. Until then, like, share, and subscribe to the Kindling channel. And remember to keep the fire burning.